So I'm with Simon Roberts, the landscape photographer. I'm going to ask him some questions. So Simon, tell us a bit about how you started in photography. Did you go to college and study photography?
Not officially. Photography was something I was interested in as a kid, as a teenager. I actually ended up studying human geography at Sheffield University. Meanwhile, still taking photographs. When I graduated in '96, I stayed in Sheffield and did the NCTJ photojournalism course, which is the kind of the only course accredited by the National Council for Training of Journalists. And I did that for about 6 months and realised that I wasn't cut out to be a news photographer, and so left, and then just began my kind of freelance career as a photographer.
And then you went, the first big project that you actually did was the one in Russia. How did that come about? Why did you decide to go to Russia?
So I'd spent 6 years freelancing in London, working for mostly self-commissioned projects, which I would then try and sell to magazines, and then doing some magazine commissions. Then in 2003, I did the World Press Masterclass in Amsterdam, and the masters that year were people like Peter Belabrowski, the photographer, Marianne Golan, the curator of Arles, and all of them kind of spoke about this sense of authorship, and that they all kind of identified that I was a good photographer and I was kind of competent at making photographs, but I really hadn't got to the stage where I'd mastered the art of authoring a body of work. And I think that was partly because as soon as you're working on magazine commissions, you don't have the time and the space to really explore your own photography. So I thought, well, the only way to do that was to really immerse myself in one project, and decided to take a year out with my wife and just travel across Russia. The reason for Russia was, well, a few things. My wife had studied Russian at university and she'd lived there 10 years earlier. So this was a kind of chance for her to go back. For me, I was interested in the fact that most of the photographs coming out of Russia depicted this place of decay and collapse, and nearly all the photographs are black and white. And so it just seemed to me like an interesting time to go and do something different, really. So it was partly an exploration of another place, of Russia, but it was also partly just an exploration for me as a photographer learning a craft, not being completely unhindered by outside influences. As soon as you work for somebody, you're subconsciously photographing for them rather than yourself.
And what was the reception you got when you went to these places? Because you didn't go to the main tourist locations at all, hardly. You went to these really back and beyond.
So we just travelled. Well, we did 75,000 miles in a year. I mean, it was quite an extraordinary trip. Most of the time, it was just bemusement. It was like, you turn up at a small village in Siberia, and they'd be like, "What on earth are you doing? Why would you want to come to this kind of outpost?" And then there was just kind of a lot of warmth, really. So a lot of people put us up, they would show us around, and it was a really interesting time to be in Russia as well, because it was early days of Putin. There wasn't quite the same control that there is now, so it was relatively easy to move around. I think it would be much more difficult to make the work that I did now, 15 years later, because of the paranoia about foreign press and general, I suppose, kind of just fear about what I might have been doing as a photographer.
And then this came out as a book, and then the next book you did was We English, and that was a very dramatic change. Suddenly you went from being a photojournalist, if you like, to taking this sort of aerial view of the English landscape inhabited by people. What brought about this change?
Well, if you look closely, I mean, photojournalism, it's a kind of weird concept, really. I mean, I didn't really see the Russia work as journalistic. It was more a kind of an exploration of a place. So actually, half of the work was landscape based. It was looking at people in landscape. There was just, I suppose, the way that I shot it was a lot looser. So I was, often kind of handheld rather than using a tripod. as the trip went on, I began using the tripod more and more, and actually spending more time kind of framing each of the pictures. But when I got back to England, felt that it was an interesting time to be making work about England for various reasons, but also, you know, referencing the work that I'd done in Russia in a way of thinking about the relationship between people and landscape. But when I really felt that I needed to have a more defined approach to the work, and portraiture just didn't seem to be something that I wanted to be making in England, and so tried to kind of come up with a more considered approach, and that became this way of looking at people within landscape, and I was quite I came up with this idea of that people had to be a third of the frame size or smaller, so there was quite a kind of a tick list of things that had to be elevated. It needed to the pictures needed to be very much about the landscape, and then populated within them would be these figures. And really, it was just a case of trying to come up with something that hadn't been done in Britain before. It's not like I was photographing. It's not like I was doing anything new in terms of other photographers have done things similar, but not necessarily within the context of England. I mean, there's references there to John Davies, but most of John Davies' photographs aren't populated with people, and so I was just trying to kind of add, I suppose, another element to the jigsaw puzzle that is photographers photographing Britain, and I was just adding another little piece. But I wanted to make sure that my piece was different from those colleagues and the kind of historic references.
So you took up these elevated positions. How would you find those? Would you just go around looking for buildings that you could go up and look down on things?
Mostly from the motorhome. So I bought a motorhome, and that was inspired by the kind of rich tradition in photography. If you think about the road trip, you've got Ansel Adams, you've got kind of Joel Sternfeld, you've got the Beckers driving around in their VW, Robert Frank, and so that idea of making a road trip I found a very interesting one. But then also thinking about how I could use a vehicle as a permanent elevated perspective, so that I could always park up and just stand on the roof. In terms of where to photograph, I did a lot of kind of research in terms of places I thought would be interesting, but then I also created a website where people could invite me to come and photograph things. So I wanted to engage an audience that I was going, the English, if you like, to be part of the kind of the work. And that kind of was an interesting process because it opened up new opportunities and new, things that maybe hadn't been photographed before. And so what I did was, as I was traveling around the country, I actually once a week would publish a photograph in the Times in the T2 section, and it would show you a picture of where I'd been that week, and then it would tell you where I was going to be next week and invite you to go to this website where you could suggest something that I could photograph. So people could follow me as I was traveling around the country, and it became a dialogue, if you like.
But most of the locations you choose are ones that are known for tourists, because you have a lot of tourism in there. So were you able to come up with locations that were genuinely supplied by your website and the feedback from that?
Yeah, I suppose I photographed maybe 10% of the ideas. I mean, the problem was that I'd be in Cornwall and somebody would say, tomorrow in Lancashire, I'm doing this, So actually, logistically, it was impossible to kind of crisscross the country. So I had to be quite pragmatic in the way that I did it. Hence, using the Times, at least then people could follow my actual journey and suggest an idea in a location I was going to next. It wasn't so much about, there is an element of tourism in the book, but it's very much about leisure. It's about looking at places that the English go to use for their leisure activities. So, what are the landscapes which we use for our very minimal leisure time that we have? And so that might be a Sunday league football event, or it could have been a music festival, or it might be a kind of farm, annual farm show. So, looking at these particular places that bring people together.
And then next up came the book about the Piers. So how did that come about? Why did you decide suddenly to go out and photograph every English or indeed British pier?
British pier. Well, that was actually as a result of a magazine commission. So Cheryl Newman at the Saturday Telegraph magazine had seen a photograph I took of Blackpool Pier in the We English book, and asked whether I'd be interested in photographing some for her summer issue for the magazine, and so I agreed as long as I could photograph them in bad weather. So I didn't want to create this kind of nice, pretty postcards of Piers. Instead, I wanted to kind of somehow isolate and look at these eccentric British Victorian architectural structures in the sea, which are particularly British. I mean, invention. And so I photographed several of them, and then became somewhat obsessed by them, and then decided that I was going to photograph every single one of them. Really, because actually, when I started researching it, that there were very few contemporary studies of these structures. There had been a German photographer that had photographed them in the 1980s, but apart from that, it was really a case of Francis Frith and his team of photographers, in the early 20th century that had done the most recent archival study, if you like. And so for me, it was a good opportunity to create this archive, because really the only way the book can work is if you photograph all of them. You can't have a book of half the Piers, so.
And I assume there's a very enthusiastic peer society.
So the National Pier Society provided my research, into what is an official pleasure pier and what isn't a pleasure pier, because the last thing I wanted to do was get the wrath of a pier that didn't get in the book. And the book is at the back of the book. There's information about every pier, so it's very different from Motherland and We English in the sense that it is much more of a kind of archive document. It's a kind of study of a particular architectural feature of the British landscape, whereas the others are much more kind of studies of human interaction.
And then you very ambitiously thought you would turn your hand to trying to interpret austerity, which is a very difficult thing to actually think can be photographed. How on earth did you find any pictures that would fit into that category?
Yeah, that was much more challenging because, as you mentioned, it's not like the kind of bread lines of the 1930s. It's not the kind of mass observation photographs that were going to be available. It was something that hit a middle class. It was, each of us were somewhat poorer, but a very difficult thing to illustrate. So, but where you could see it, we were in protests. This is the one way where the public did come out and show their anger. So part of it was photographing protests around the country. I then began photographing the actual posters, the protest posters, which I found as kind of the iconography of protest posters were quite interesting. But then I also started doing some video work. I collected text from political speeches and created different ways of trying to explore this particularly kind of non-visual theme, and brought it together it was part of a group show actually called Show Me the Money, the Image of Finance, which was organised by the Northern Gallery of Contemporary Art. So it's kind of interesting for me exercise to kind of extend my usual way of interpreting something just through photographs.
And then the last book you've published has been Merry Albion.
Yeah.
How different is Merry Albion to We English? Is it taken the project further? Has it moved on? Talk us through the changes that can be seen in this new book.
I mean, so after, I suppose in about 2010, after I'd started photographing the election, the general election in 2010, which I did for the British Parliament, and then I did the austerity, I decided that I needed to kind of keep the same format of composition, so this elevated perspective, people in landscape, but that rather than just looking at leisure, that I would extend it to other areas and start looking at different themes that were very much related to contemporary British society. So whether that be looking at themes of immigration, energy security, debates around the military, but also looking at key events that were taking place within our annual diary, if you like. So I started looking at the Olympics, for instance, or Margaret Thatcher's funeral, or the royal wedding. These kind of key marker points, which I felt were kind of important to be recording. Of course, Brexit for me provided an end point, because I felt that this was I'd started making these pictures in 2007, which was at the stage of the collapse of the New Labour and a particular shift in British politics. And then a decade later, we had the most significant post-war decision in British politics. So you had these kind of two buffer points, if you like, and I felt that this was a good period of time within which to bring this collection of photographs together. So it's really a kind of a study, if you like, a visual record of this particular period of British history, which I felt was important to record. The different thing with Merry Albion is I also invited a lot of writers. So I actually commissioned 8 different essays by different political social commentators to also engage with not just the photographs in the book, but just themes about where Britain has come and how we got to this point. So it becomes more of a collaborative piece of work than just my own photographs.
And I guess this is the anthropologist in you as well.
Yeah, I suppose anthropologist, ethnographer, geographer. I'm just interested in exploring themes and communicating, and through mainly photography, but also other means.
And where are you going from here? Have you determined?
The big question: what comes next? Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is having finished a 10-year project, a particular way of photographing. I actually feel slightly liberated that maybe I can change the form of my work. I think I don't want to be taking the same photograph, in 10 years' time, and so it's now an opportunity to be a bit more experimental, really. So I've started using moving image a bit more. I've climbed off the motorhome and hit the street again. So maybe you'll start seeing some more kind of intimate portraiture than.
So maybe combining some of the things you established in the Mother Russia.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I do look back at the Motherland book with fondness, and it's been a long time since I've done portraiture, so maybe that's something that I might return to. Watch this space.
Great. Well, we look forward to seeing it. Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you. Cheers.